Hey, what's up, guys? I got this book a while ago, like Horace Walpole, right? The Castle of Otranto. This is I guess a historical document relic, very important in terms of horror, right? The first, the first engraved of the Gothic novels, right? Hugely popular in its day and hugely influential. Of course, this was written in England, but it's always brought up. Now you can say, okay, you look at these old Gothic novels. I have found them to be actually even this one too, which was everyone people like Lovecraft was saying, oh, it's very mediocre, blah blah, but it is it's like the first sort of melding, right? The romanticism, you want to say the Roman, the Gothic, right? Which is described in here, but it's like, it's kind of not, it's not really good. It's just the first one, right? I didn't get that with this. This was very readable. Now, right off the bat, my man, the author here, it's just all, there's no, it's just run on paragraphs. It's like nonstop. There's no, like you said, there's no real paragraphs in it. But I was engrossed enough for a novel written in the 18th century. It wasn't super long. It wasn't like one of these like 1,000 page Victor Hugo monstrosities, right? Um, and there was I will disagree with Lovecraft on some things, but let me just get into here. Um, when they describe, of course, the author himself, right? They do a little bit on the man, obviously, because like I said, this is like a historical document at this point. The son of a politician in Parliament, of course. I like how they go. He was a gentle, sickly, somewhat effeminate boy. What is this? What does this mean? I don't know. But it's interesting. Of course, he's associated with the Whigs, right? The Whig Party. Occasionally tried his hand at pamphleteering, right? Pamphleteering was. I'm gonna go into that in another book. Pamphleteering was, I guess, the DIY of its time, right? I'm talking about, of course, Mr. Walpole. He was sort of like a background guy in politics. He was known for, he made his own in Strawberry Hill, right? Made his own sort of castle, architectural sort of oddity mentioned here. And he also wrote. So now, in terms of Mr. Walpole, he mentions, right. I mentioned the idea of the Gothic, right? The word Gothic, right? Of course, you think of the Goths, the Visigoths, right? The word Gothic at the time was almost always a synonym for rudeness, barbarousness, crudity, coarseness, and lack of taste, like the barbarians, right? After Walpole, the world assumed two main major meanings. First, vigorous, bold, heroic, and ancient. And second, quaint, charming, romantic, perhaps a little decadent in its association with Romanism. Now, the idea of romanticism. Now, this is before the Romantic movement proper, right? But Romanism, the idea of like the Byron poem, right? I'm with the Roman, right? The Roman world, the ancient world, a world that was like an alien world, but was the foundation of, yeah, let's be honest, of your British Empire. A lot of interesting connotations with this. A lot of interesting things here. The book also came out as a pseudonym, and it's very interesting to see the author himself, Walter Scott, to the introduction. But I'll go to the one of the editions. Obviously, this was released under a pseudonym. A preface to the first edition, right? The following work, he mentions, he does like the sort of thing where like this thing was written by a mysterious anonymous person. It was translated from something found in the library, right? It was printed at Napoli in the black letter in the year 1529. So they're trying. It's almost like you could argue a sort of found footage. I hate to use that term, but like a found document of a translation of something. So the guy's trying to preface it like this is an actual document that was found translated into English from something from Napoli in Naples, right back in the day. And the preface to the second edition, when after the anonymous author was now known as Mr. Walpole, and he gives a little more insight into what he was trying to do, right? It was an attempt to blend the two kinds of romance, right? Not romance like you think with the friggin' like women novels, the idea of the Roman, right? These ancient sort of sensibility, where the violence and the darkness and like, the demons of the past, the pre-enlightenment thing was part and parcel into the story, right? The ancient and the modern. And by doing so, he created like you could say in terms of a modern, in modern literature, he did a very good, actually a great idea. So I like how he brings up here where he's like, I mean, this guy's bringing everything up from the Voltaire, right? Unhappy Shakespeare, hast thou made Rosencrantz, informers Compiere, Guildenstern of the iconography of the Palace of Copenhagen, so they're presenting us with a moral dialogue between the Prince of Denmark and the gravedigger. The illuminated pit of Paris would have been instructed a second time to adore thy talents, obviously. The result I have said is to shelter my own daring under the canon of the brightest genius of this country, Mr. Shakespeare, right? At least I might have pleaded that I'm creating a new species of romance, right? I was at liberty to lay down the rule that I thought fit for the conduct of it, but I should be more proud of having imitated, however faintly, weakly, and a distance so masterly a pattern than to enjoy the entire merit of invention, unless I would have marked my work with its genius as well as with originality. Such as it is, the public have honored it sufficiently, whatever rank the suffrages allowed to it. Obviously, they even mention in here that one of the ideas that your book had made it is if it had been dramatized, right? If a play had been made of it, which had been done for this. Now, what is the story of the Castle of Otranto? I'll go to Mr. Lovecraft. I guess I will spoil it because this is an old, far into the public domain. The public doesn't even exist for it anymore, right? It's public. Right, but it remained. He mentions the early Gothic novel and, of course, the seminal classic. It remained for a very sprightly and worthy Englishman, other than Horace Walpole himself, to give the growing impulse definite shape, become the actual founder of the literary horror story as a permanent form, founder of medieval romance and mystery as a dilettante's diversion, of the quaintly imitated Gothic castle. Right, I mentioned his architectural work, Strawberry Hill. Walpole in 1764, none of y'all were around back then, published The Castle of Otranto, tale of the supernatural, which, though thoroughly unconvincing and mediocre in itself, was destined to exert an almost unparalleled influence in the literature of the weird, right? First venturing it only as a translation, right, found footage, right, by one William Marshall Gent from the Italian of a mythical unknown filo morale. The author later acknowledged his connection with the book, right, which I had mentioned in the preface, and took pleasure in its wide and instantaneous popularity, which extended to many editions, early dramatization, and wholesale imitation both in England and in Germany, right? The story, tedious, artificial, and melodramatic, is further impaired by a brisk, prosaic style whose urbane sprightliness, oh man, Lovecraft, you're killing me, bro. No permits the creation of a truly weird atmosphere. Now, I will say that I don't agree with her. He's like truly weird. When I read this, there was a lot of atmosphere I felt, okay, and almost surrealness, in terms of like the son of the evil villain, right, is crushed under a giant helmet, okay, which is near a giant statue, and then there's a giant sword found in it. It's very bizarre. It's very weird in that it reminded me almost of like a combination of like some kind of like ghosts and goblins, something like some kind of like horror, sort of supernatural like video game. I don't know what to, all of the stuff is there. All the atmosphere is there. I don't know what he means by a weird atmosphere, right? Of course, Manfred, the villain, right? Tells of Manfred, unscrupulous and usurping prince, right? Manfred, I always think of one of my favorite things from Lord Byron, right? The Manfred. I had done a video on that. I think it sort of gives the story over here, what the description of it does not have a happy ending, right? Right. Such as a tale, flat, stilted, blah blah blah. Right. What it did above all else was to create a novel type of scene, puppet characters, and incidents, which handled to better advantage by writers more naturally adapted to real creation, stimulated the growth of an imitative Gothic school, which in turn inspired the real weavers of cosmic terror, the line of actual artists beginning with Poe. Okay, so essentially, his opinion of it, and he describes it here. I will just say that for a novel written in 1764, and for something that was, the precedents of it was totally something new, even though obviously he was inspired by the old medieval stories. He really crafted something fairly compelling to me. I know, as a modern person. And I'm just gonna bring up. I'll end it with this. I recommend this. It's not a long read. It's a little melodramatic, right? The women are all like, oh, always on their knees, and the men are, either evil or like heroic. And there's a lot of interesting ideas. There's always the idea that you see in a lot of these things of the wars going on with the Mohammedans, right? Obviously, the story takes place in Italy, so you're a lot closer to the Mohammedans than the elves of Europe, right? If you know what I mean by that. But I'm gonna bring up two parts here that I kind of. This is an example of the prose in it. So, I mean, all right. This is the initial scene. This is like the scene of horror, and it's very bizarre, right? So in terms of weirdness, the uncanny, that the thing that should not be, is very much well represented here, right? The first thing that struck Manfred's eye was a group of his servants endeavoring to raise something that appeared to him a mountain of sable plumes. He gazed without believing his sight. "What are ye doing?" cried Manfred wrathfully. "Where is my son?" A volley of voices replied, "Oh, my lord, the prince, the helmet, the helmet." Shocked with these lamentable sounds and dreading he knew not what, he advanced hastily. But what a sight for a father's eyes! He beheld his child dashed to pieces and almost buried under an enormous helmet, 100 times more large than any casque ever made for a human being, and that's shaded with a proportionable quantity of black feathers. The horror of the spectacle, the ignorance of all around how this misfortune had happened, and above all, the tremendous phenomenon before him took away the prince's speech. Yet his silence lasted longer than even grief could occasion. He fixed his eyes on what he wished in vain to believe a vision, and seemed less attentive to his loss than buried in meditation, and the stupendous object that had occasioned it. He examined the fatal cask, nor could he even the bleeding, mangled remains of the young prince divert the eyes of Manfred from the portent before him. All who had known his partial fondness for young Conrad were as much surprised at the prince's insensibility as thunderstruck themselves at the miracle of the helmet. They conveyed the disfigured corpse into the hall without receiving the least direction from Manfred. Right, so his kind of inbred, messed up son was to be married off, was crushed by a giant helmet which came from seemingly the beyond. Right, this was like, whoa! They got into the action right away. Right, and now I'll go to another scene, and this is supernatural. This is not supernatural. This is not like, oh, the Scooby Doo, the Anne Radcliffe kind of thing. This is a supernatural. So I'll go over here. The Marquis was about to return when the figure rising, right, stood some moments fixed in meditation without regarding him. The Marquis, expecting the holy person to come forth and meaning to excuse his uncivil interruption, said, "Reverend Father, I sought the Lady Hippolyta." Hippolyta replied, a hollow voice, "Camest thou to this castle to seek Hippolyta?" And then the figure turned slowly round, discovered to Frederick the fleshless jaws and empty sockets of a skeleton, wrapped in a hermit's cowl. "Angels of grace, protect me!" cried Frederick, recoiling. Deserve their protection, said the spectre. Frederick, falling on his knees, adjured the phantom to take pity on him. Dost thou not remember me? Said the apparition. Remember the wood of Joppa. Art thou the holy hermit? Cried Frederick, trembling. Can I do aught for thy eternal peace? Wast thou delivered from bondage? Said the spectre, to pursue carnal delights? Hast thou forgotten the buried saber, right, at the behest of heaven engraven on it? I have not, said Frederick. But say, blessed spirit, what is thy errand to me? What remains to be done? To forget Matilda, said the apparition, and vanished. Frederick's blood froze in his veins, right? So, this I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. You're probably like that. I mean, listen, man, I remember Shakespeare in elementary school and junior high school. Thy, thee, thou, the, what the hell is this, man? This is boring. So of course they sabotaged us by doing that. So then again, us. Who is us? As if the masses of people could ever have any kind of, right, Mr. Lovecraft, the masses of people to be taught this. You could say they were lucky and blessed, but it would be like speaking to, like, like your puppy, a puppy or an animal, you know, for this stuff. This stuff was not meant for the hoi polloi, the rabble. Okay, now I'm a weird dude. I'm definitely a man for the working class, but let's be honest, man. Most people are not gonna take to this. Okay, it's for a special, sensitive person with a degree of knowledge. So anyway, I got a little elitist there. Forgive me. I usually don't do that. I'm usually, like I said, a man of the the well, actually, I'm not. I'm actually a real. I'm becoming more and more a real fucking misanthropic asshole all around. But let's pretend for a second that I'm not. So, and forget me. This was actually a lot of fun. This was better than I thought. Far better as a historical relic. Far more interesting in terms of literature. So, and I'll leave it at that with this long ass video. But I figured this thing, the precursor to all the fun we're gonna have in the 19th and 20th centuries with this stuff, it deserves a little tribute. So, all right, later.